Hello, everybody. Welcome back. This is part 4 of the video series on the UiPath Apps to Data Service integration. In this video, we are going to be talking about how to edit or delete records in the data service directly from the UiPath app. If you haven't already watched the part 3 of this series, I would strongly recommend that you watch it to get the context around the application that we are going to be talking about in this video. So with that, let me get started. So I'm going to start from the beginning. So the first thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be looking for some of the records that I would like to view responses for. And I click on the go to responses. And here I have many number of records that were previously submitted. And in this survey manager page, I have the ability to create a new response or edit or delete a response. You might observe that the edit and delete response buttons are disabled. And that is because I haven't selected any record here from this table control. But when I select a certain record, you will see that these two buttons are enabled. So once these two buttons are enabled, the user has the option to either edit the existing record or delete this existing record. But for this setup, for this arrangement to be made available to the user, there needs to be a slight modification in the table control and also some of the attributes of these two buttons. So let us jump back into the UiPath App Studio and look at how this setup has been created. So I'm on the survey manager page, and this is the form that we just looked at. It was covered in detail in the part 3 video. So before the user can edit or delete a record, the user has to select a record from this table control. And each time the user selects a record, there is a value changed event that is fired on this table control. So to capture the value or the ID of the record selected, we have to implement the value changed event handler. So if I go to the table control, click on the events and edit rule of this event, there is a variable called dr selected row ID. It's an app variable that's already been created, and it's been populated with the value of the ID of the currently selected record. And this ID will be available automatically when the user makes a selection. So if I type in DT underscore, that brings us to the DT underscore responses dot selected value. And this entire object has captured the record selected by the user on the table control in the form. So if I click on ID, this value, the ID, the unique ID of that record will get captured in the selected row ID variable. So now that this application has got the unique ID of this record, it is in a position to either edit or delete that record. Coming back to this form, if you look at these two buttons, the conditions to enable or disable these buttons are the same. If I click on edit response and go to general and look at the disabled attribute, you can see that it is regulated by an expression that says keep the button disabled if the currently selected record ID is empty. So if the user does not select a record from this table control, the dr selected row ID variable becomes blank and the is blank condition becomes true and the edit response button is disabled. Similarly, if you click on the delete response, the very same condition regulates the disabled behavior of this button. And consequently, when the user selects a record on this table control, then the DR's selected row ID gets populated, and this condition becomes false, and these two buttons become enabled. Next, let's take a look at the delete response functionality first. Let's take a look at the delete response functionality first, because that's the easiest to work with. So if I click on the delete response button and go to the events, there is an edit rule. And if I click on it, first, there is a variable that is called var form mode. The var form mode is enabled only if you're creating a new record. If you're editing or deleting an existing record, then this value is set to blank. So once that value has been set to empty, and here I have a message box that is used for troubleshooting. All it does is it makes sure that the correct record is being deleted. Once that's done, we move on to opening another page. Now, when we delete a record, the standard practice is to have the user confirm that the delete operation is going to happen. And once the delete operation is confirmed, that record is permanently removed from the underlying data service. So if we jump to the survey delete form, you can see that there is another simple interface that confirms with the user whether this record must be deleted. So there are a bunch of these expressions, and what these expressions do is simply reproduce the value of the various columns of that selected record to confirm that the user is deleting the correct record. So if the user clicks yes, delete this record, and if I click on this button and go into edit rule, the delete operation in itself is pretty simple. So we go past the form validations, and what we do is we make sure that the form is valid, and if it isn't valid, then we put in a message informing the user that the record has not been selected. And then we make sure that the form mode is empty, because we want to confirm that we are performing an edit or a delete operation. Now, in this case, we are deleting an entity record, and this is how an entity record is deleted. There is a separate action. I'm going to recreate that here. It's already here, but I'm going to recreate it again. I'm going to select delete entity record. So the next question that the delete entity record action is asking is which entity record should be deleted. And therefore, we simply can't bind it to the entire data service entity we have here in our app. We'll have to give it the specific unique ID of that record to be deleted. So for that, we need to write the lookup function again. So this is the lookup function we have, and I'm going to write that here again. So I start with an equal to, and then I invoke the lookup function, open brackets. Next comes the entity. And then what the lookup function does is, based on the condition, returns the record that needs to be deleted. So comma, open brackets, and I need to type in the field on which the entity is being filtered, and that is the unique identifier. And I get that from the preferred skill profile ID field of that entity. And I double click, and the condition is comma, equal to, comma, and the ID is the unique ID of the selected row from the table control. And we saw that when the user clicked on the table control and selected that record. So I'm going to drag in that app variable, and I drag in dr selected row ID, close bracket, close bracket. And that's how simple it is to tell the app how to delete a record from the underlying data service entity. Now, once we have done that, the other two steps are to configure the when deleted or on error events of the delete entity action. So I'm going to be deleting this because I already have done that in the step above. So I'll delete this and go back. Obviously, we are going to inform the user that the record has been permanently deleted by concatenating the string with the response ID of the record. And then we scroll down and we reset. This is important. We reset the selected record ID of the table control. Remember, this record doesn't exist anymore. And once it's been deleted, then all references to that record will need to be reset. And as a result, this app variable will be reset. Now, if by any chance there is an error, we configure the on error action. And in this case, we put up a simple message informing the user that the delete action has failed, and that will be followed up by the error that has been returned by the backend data service. And that's pretty much it for how we would delete a record. So let me close this out and let's watch this in action. I'm going to go back to the main page and I'm going to put in, I have many number of records and I'm going to delete the second record. And obviously, when I make that selection, the delete response button is enabled. So I click the delete response. And here you can see that the delete response ID displayed briefly. And the form, the app is confirming that this is indeed the record I want to delete. And this is, of course, the correct record. And I want to delete it. The record has been deleted. So now if I go back to the survey homepage, the search criteria is still in session. So I click go to my responses and you can see that the record I deleted is not available anymore. And that is how we delete a record from the underlying data service using direct integration with the UiPath app. Okay, next, let's see if we can edit an existing record. So I'm going to select the record that says that I'm spending 3 days of the week on working with UiPath RPA. I want to actually increase this. So I'm going to select this record. It's already selected, but just for the kicks, I'm going to select it again. And I'm going to edit the response. Here again, you can see the unique ID of that record is briefly displayed. But what is happening here is a bit more elaborate than deleting a record. In this case, I'm going to be reusing the form that is used to create a new record to also edit an existing record. And therefore, the values of the various columns of the currently selected record must be pre-populated into this form. And that's what's happening here. So I want to change this value from 3 to 5.5 days of the week. And when I hit save, I get a confirmation saying that my record has been updated. So going back to the survey homepage, my search criteria is in session. So go to my responses. And here we can see that the record has been indeed updated to 5.5 days of the week spent on working with UiPath RPA. And here again, you see the default behavior that the two buttons have been disabled because no record has been currently selected for either edit or delete. So let's go back to the app and take a look at how the edit button functionality has been constructed. So if I click on the table control and go back to the value change event and edit the rule, what I am doing here is not only populating the currently selected row ID of that record, but also populating all the app variables that are bound to the form that we covered in the previous video. So here is var first name. So as usual, if I click on this field here and type in dt underscore, I get the selected record. And of course, I get the first name. So when I double click on this, the dt responses dot first name is populated into the var first name variable. And likewise, all the application variables that we covered when we built that form in the previous video are all populated with the values from the currently selected record. And once we have that, what happens next is each time the user selects a record from this table control, all the values that you see here on the screen on the table control are populated with the respective variables. So next, we'll be clicking on the edit response button and then going to the events. And then if I click the edit rule, as usual is the case, this variable, the form mode variable, is set to empty because we are editing a record. And then we are simply displaying a message to confirm to the user that a record has been selected for edit. And then this time, we will be opening the same form that we used to create a new record. And that form is the page demo 2 survey form. So if I jump onto that form, and on the survey form, if I go to the loaded event and click on the edit rule, the form inspects the form mode variable. And that is why this variable is crucial. So what it does is, if it finds that the value of that variable is set to new, it will reset all the variables bound to its input fields to empty. So here you can see all the string type or the text type input fields have been set to empty, and the numeric type field is set to 0. That is how this form identifies that it has to either create a new record or edit an existing record. Now, if this form mode is not new, if it's empty, then the form takes no action in resetting these variables. And what happens is all these variables that we have here are populated by the values from the currently selected record on the table control. So I'm going to close this out. And the next item of focus is what happens when the user hits the save button. Obviously, those values are all populated here and the user has updated the values. And the next step for the user is to hit the save button. So if I click on the save button and edit the rule of this button, and if I navigate down, we covered all of these validation routines in the previous video. So I'm going to stream past all of those. So here again, the save button is inspecting the form mode, and it's trying to figure out whether it has to create a new record or whether it has to edit an existing entity record in the backend. So we saw this in the last video, what happens when the form mode is set to new. a new record is created. But if that form mode is not new, then the form knows that it has to edit an existing entity record. And here again, it's the same lookup function that we wrote for the delete action to tell the form what is the exact record that's being updated in the backend data service. So once we have set up the lookup function, the next step for us is to associate the current values from the local app variables to the entity fields on the left. Remember that these app variables are updated when the user updates the existing values in the front-end form. And therefore, whatever you're binding to the backend data service entity record will be the most recent value updated by the user. So once you have bound all the variables to the entity fields, the next step would be for us to implement the when created or updated event and the on error event. So to go back and demonstrate this edit functionality once again, so edit response, as soon as I click, we can see the ID here briefly. And what I'll be doing, just to confirm everything is working, I'm going to make multiple changes. There it is. The record has been updated. So I go back. And here you see that all the multiple updates made to this record have actually been effected in the backend data service. And just to confirm that everything is working fine, I'm going to go into data service. And I'm going to look at the most latest record that's been updated. So I'm going to sort by updated time descending. There it is. And if I go back to this record, and you can see the values actually reflect that the right record has indeed been updated in the backend data service. That's all for this video. And this brings us to the end of the UiPath to data service integration series. Please do like and subscribe to my channel. And I truly appreciate the support of all the audience who have subscribed and watch my videos, and also to those who have not yet subscribed and still watching my videos, but please do subscribe so that I'm motivated to continue posting more videos to the channel and helping the community. Thank you, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.